I think we had a strong sign this week that the Republican Party, not the conservative movement, they are two very different entities, but the Republican establishment has started in the Trump era to understand the culture war. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor here at the Federalist. I'm with my colleague Kylie Zempel, assistant editor at the Federalist, and we are going to break down Kelly Loeffler, Republican senator of Georgia, her decision to introduce legislation that intends to protect girls' sports on the basis of Title IX. Now, Loeffler introduced this bill this week. It's co-sponsored by Mike Lee, Marsha Blackburn, James Lankford, and Tom Cotton. It stipulates that schools that receive federal funds would be in violation of Title IX should they, quote, permit a person whose sex is male to participate in an athletic program or activity that is designated for women or girls. Remember, Title IX, no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. You can kind of see where Loeffler is going with that, and where, you know, someone like Mike Lee, literally a constitutional scholar, would be interested in a bill like this. Now, I think the bill is absolutely good on principle. I think when you look at a lot of these cases around the country, whether it's Connecticut or sports programs elsewhere, these are girls who have poured their blood, sweat, and tears into their sport for years, and there are biological males, trans girls, racing aside them and kicking their butts, quite frankly, because they have an obvious biological advantage. Now, the reason I think, aside from the principle of this bill, which I think is good, the reason this is interesting, and I have a story up on the Federalist about this, the headline is Kelly Loeffler's Bill to Protect Female Athletes is a sign the GOP finally figured out the culture war. That's the crux of this. This Kelly Loeffler is in the middle of a competitive, heated re-election campaign. The Republican establishment before the Trump era would never see the wisdom in picking a culture war fight in the middle of a re-election campaign. This goes against every instinct that the Republican establishment has had up until the Trump era. You'd think they would, they'd be terrified of it. But Kelly Loeffler, who owns a WNBA team, is a co-owner of a WNBA team, the Atlanta Dream, is actually leaning into the culture war here. Kylie, I've wrote 1,000 words on this and I've already spoken for a few minutes. Tell me what you think about this decision and whether you think it reflects a shift in the Republican Party in terms of the culture war.
Oh, it absolutely demonstrates a shift. I mean, my reaction to her introducing this is it's about time. I mean, it's the most common sense bill, discrimination on the basis of sex. Does it get more, obvious of examples than in women's sports? I mean, it's so obviously harmful to women. And so I think this is great on her for introducing it. Of course, like you, I also agree with her doing this, but I think it definitely demonstrates a shift. But of course, it's in line with the shift that's already been happening. So, the people elected Donald Trump in 2016, and there is no better example of conservatives wanting to engage the culture war and being willing to upset the establishment than electing Donald Trump. And I think this just fits in line with that, and might be a green light for Republicans, even in, highly contested races. Kind of giving them the courage and the go-ahead to take these strong cultural stands that in the past they would have been afraid to do, but now feel like, oh, the people are behind me here. And particularly on the trans issue, it's like, this is something that it's not a fringe idea, but it's something that the majority of Americans, I think, can see how harmful this is to females in sports.
Or just illogical. It's illogical. And so I've had a really interesting experience with this story. I was going to say a funny experience, and you know what? To some extent, it is funny. When I tweeted the story out, a bunch of people from the left piled on and were like, "Have you heard what happened to Pat McCrory?" And saying, trans rights are human rights, and just, Republicans like Kelly Loeffler, running on hate. How is that going to help? And it's, to me, so much it's such a good example of what a thick bubble, some of these folks on the left and in the media live in. I reached out to a Republican strategist familiar with the race who told me Too many in the mainstream press and DC operative class view this as Loeffler playing to her base, but it's really a winning issue for her with the suburban voters north of Atlanta that she will need to win in January. And there's some blue checks, like a couple of them mocking that, being like, you were being trolled by whatever this Republican strategist, whoever that person is, they're trolling. Don't be so fast, because that actually, there's an organization, the American Principles Project. It's run by Terry Schilling. They have done a lot of research on how on what the response is in swing states to ads and to positions, Republican positions on girls' sports, and Terry Schilling said not only is Senator Kelly Loeffler the MVP for girl athletes across America for her work to save women's sports, she's the new Karl Rove. I expect as it becomes clear that pro-family political issues will win elections, the GOP will continue to use these issues to both fix America and win elections. And that is what I think is important about this story, is that there's the principle, and there's also the fact that, like, what people have not understood in the Beltway bubble for years is that these cultural issues are winning issues. There's populist appeal to saying girls are girls and boys are boys, because this, like, the radical left mainstreamed this radical idea about sex and gender so quickly that people's heads are spinning, and it's just been forced down everyone's throats. Otherwise, they're terrified to say anything. There's like no dissent is allowed, because you will be pounced upon, you'll be kicked out of the PTA, you'll be run out of town. And so this was just jammed down everybody's throats while the Republican Party was sticking on the sidelines. And here we are in 2020. And when Pat McCrory ran in 2016, this was literally a different world in terms of gender ideology. It was nowhere near as mainstream as it is right now.
Right. Particularly on this issue. I mean, you know, there are other culture war issues that maybe you would still be a little bit hesitant to be so black and white about it if you're running for re-election. But on this issue, it's like, who is she really ostracizing by making this claim? I mean, is there anyone that, you know, is of the opinion that biological males should be able to compete in girls' sports that would have voted for a GOP candidate? You know, that she has suddenly like taken out of her electorate. I don't think so.
Yeah, and there's also a huge difference between a bathroom bill and a bill about girls' sports. Right. So just dramatically different appeal with voters, or dramatically different message to voters. So not only has the situation accelerated rapidly, but it's also, the difference between bathrooms and sports is huge.
It is.
And so the messaging, like, there are probably a lot of average people who consider themselves tolerant, normal voters who like might be in the middle, center right, and friendly towards the LGBT cause, who would watch one of App's ads, which you can check out on their YouTube channel, and say, yeah, that's unfair.
Right. It's also interesting, you know, because of course it is lumped into the LBGT community. If I could talk, that'd be great. LGBT community, but it is different. It's really its own entity. It's not the same, and it does harm women. So you have a lot of people who, you know, they might be more sympathetic to the rest of the LGBT movement, but not something that is actively hurting females and young people.
Yeah, and I mean, this is just such an obvious issue. Like, the science is on the side of Senator Loeffler and this bill, but beyond the science, like, this is just something we instinctively know. We just know that men are, on average, stronger and more capable in most sports than women are, and that's something that is such an instinctively understood principle or concept that you can run. Like, if you're running smart ads that, you know, don't come across as bigoted and hateful and aren't sort of like clumsy, you know, conservatives can be in their own bubble, and they sometimes will run in these issues in a way that is very off-putting, and can come across really poorly. If you're not doing that, if you're dismissing the impact of that, and you're someone on the left or in the mainstream media because you're thinking back to Pat McCrory's bathroom bill fiasco in 2016, or maybe what happened in Indiana with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act when Mike Pence was governor, You are in such a thick bubble. If you're mocking and condescending conservatives for noticing what Loeffler's doing here, you're in a bubble.
Also, just more broadly, I mean, the left does this all the time. Like the entire Democratic primary is, Democrats outwoking each other and trying to be the most polarizing. And of course, that backfired on most of them. Joe Biden ended up being the nominee, but he still chose Kamala Harris as his running mate, like one of the most far left progressive options that he could have gone with. The left is engaged in a no holds barred attack on the right, on institutions. And so the fact that it's even like an issue that a Republican would take a strong stand that could be polarizing for something is crazy to me, because the left does it all the time.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is such an important point, and I wrote a story about this around Thanksgiving last year, is that, and I got some tweets again to this extent, and by the way, nothing that happens on Twitter is representative of anything other than the dumpster fire that Twitter is, but some of the responses on Twitter were funny because they were saying, like, Kelly Loeffler is inciting a culture war, she's not fighting it. No. The people inciting the culture war are the ones that saying girls should have to compete against boys in a girls' sport. That's inciting the culture war. The progressive movement, by definition, is always attempting to make progress. Thus, they're the ones waging the culture war. It's ridiculous to accuse the senator of doing that in this case.
And the culture war is raging. You're not inciting it. Like, we are in the middle of the culture war that's going on all of the time. So, the fact, it's like if people fight back, then they're inciting it. But what are conservatives supposed to do? Just like roll over?
Yes,
they are.
But that's exactly what the
right.
left wants, and that's why the left has this very narrow boundary of acceptable speech.
It's just crazy because it's like, of course, the left would be mad about Loeffler introducing this bill. But what baffles me is just that so many conservatives are still unwilling to, upset the peace and say something that is objectionable, but true and right. And I, good on her for doing that.
Yeah. And, I think in the Trump era that mindset is really shifting quickly. I think Kavanaugh, first of all, did radicalize a lot of people. And I think watching, like, one thing that's important to understand about Donald Trump is that media corruption was essentially a part of his platform in 2016.
True.
He didn't win the popular vote, but he just trounced a really strong Republican primary field, and he managed to win the Electoral College against all of the expectations of everybody in the Beltway. And media corruption was basically a pillar in his platform, and an important one, and political correctness. And so, having watched that, like, Republicans in the past would have been terrified to pick a fight with the media and the LGBT lobby, like, in the middle of an election season. But now that it's kind of a badge of honor to have big tech and the corporatists in the media pounce on you, it's not a big deal if you get those negative headlines for doing something that's right on principle, because actually it makes voters think that you're on the right side of the argument, which usually if the media is on the other side of an argument, you're probably on the right side of it.
True. Well, and since 2016, I mean, the media and the social justice warriors have proved Trump right on the media corruption count and on the PC count. So maybe we'll continue to see that with Loeffler with this bill.
Yeah, again, like, I think that's true, but the media is still in the bubble where they actually think it's the opposite.
Fair and same.
So thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you again soon.